Greetings, and welcome back to the LifeGate Sound PreSonus StudioLive 24.4.2 Digital Performance and Recording Mixer Training, Part 2. This training module is intended as an overview of the PreSonus StudioLive 24.4.2 mixer. It has been developed for use by the sound and tech teams at LifeGate Church. If you have not already watched Part 1 of this training, please do so prior to beginning this module. As mentioned in Part 1 of this training, the horizontal size of this photograph of the SL24.4.2 has been expanded for illustrative purposes. This makes it easier to see the smaller sections of the mixer as they are outlined. We are now leaving the Fat channel and moving on to the input channel buttons. However, even as we explore this and other sections of the mixer, we will find functions that tie back into the features of the Fat channel. Directly above each of the 24 input channels, we find 3 by now familiar buttons: Select, Solo, and Mute. We are already familiar with the functions of these 3 buttons from our aux bus studies, so we already know that Select enables Fat channel adjustments for the selected channel or bus. Solo sends a channel or bus to the solo bus, also known as the Q bus, where it can be monitored either through headphones or a control room speaker apart from the rest of the mix. And Mute silences the output of a channel or bus. The only real difference here is that the solo buttons on the channels have added functionality imparted to them in the Q section of the mixer. Via the Q section, soloing can be PFL, pre-fade listen, or AFL, after fade listen. Also, in the Q section of the mixer, SIP or solo in place can be selected. The Q section will be covered in more detail later in this training. There are 24 input channel faders on the SL24.4.2. A fader is basically a volume control that slides along a track as opposed to a rotary knob. The channel trim knob at the top of an input channel is usually set such that, in normal operation, a good output signal for the channel can be achieved when the fader is set to unity. A proper trim adjustment will produce a channel output which is neither distorted, due to being overdriven, nor too weak. More will be discussed regarding this when we examine the metering section of the mixer. The faders on the SL24.4.2 are 100 mm throw mechanical faders. They are not flying faders, that is to say, they are not motorized, as are found on some digital mixers. Therefore, they do not move on their own in response to loading a saved scene. Although this is not as user-friendly as having flying faders, it does help to reduce the cost and complexity of the mixer. PreSonus has provided a workaround to the issue of not having flying faders by including a feature in the metering controls section called Locate. Fader Locate will be covered in more depth later in the presentation when we discuss the use of the metering controls. Similar to the input channel buttons, the subgroups have the same 3 Select, Solo, and Mute buttons. There are some differences in functionality, however, between the subgroup and input channel buttons. For the subgroup buttons, we find the following behaviors. Select works mostly the same as for the input channels. However, as previously mentioned, subgroups can only be assigned to the mains bus, not to other subgroups. Solo will only work in AFL, after fade listen mode, not in PFL or SIP modes. The mute button, however, works the same as for the input channels. There are 4 subgroup faders. They are similar in form and function to the input channel faders. Subgroups make it easier to control the volume of related input channels. For example, when using several mics for an acoustic drum kit, you could assign all those input channels to Subgroup 1 fader. The output of Subgroup 1 would then be assigned to the system mains. As a result, the mains volume of the entire drum kit could be controlled via the Subgroup 1 fader. Another use of subgroups in live mixing would be for controlling groups of similar instruments, such as guitars, or for groups of vocalists. At LifeGate, we run all instruments and vocalist mics through subgroups, while mics for speaking, such as the pastor's mic and congregational mic, are assigned directly to the system mains. In this manner, we can quickly mute instruments and vocalists via the subgroup mute buttons, while the speaking mics remain unaffected. The mains fader is similar in form and function to those for the input channels and subgroups. Note that unlike some mixers, although the mains output is a stereo pair, PreSonus uses a single fader to control the mains outputs. To balance the stereo mains pair, use the channels or subgroups pan function in the FAT channel. The mains select button enables the dynamics and equalization functions of the FAT channel to be accessed by the system mains. However, not all functions, such as the routing assigns, are available for the mains. It should be noted that usually the parametric EQ functions of the FAT channel will not be used for the system mains, even though they are available. This is because normally the mains are set to take advantage of the built-in 31-band GEQs, graphic equalizers, found in the SL24.4.2. The graphic EQ button is located above the mains fader select button. It provides access to the 8 31-band GEQs that are part of the SL24.4.2. When the GEQ button is activated, FAT channel access to the GEQ controls is enabled. The GEQs are adjusted on the mixer via the meter and rotary encoder sections of the FAT channel. These interact with the master control section. Via master control, you can select which of the 8 GEQs are assigned to a given output bus. Master control is also used to save and recall GEQ settings. It should be mentioned that it is easier to adjust the GEQs via the PreSonus VSL software. PreSonus also recently incorporated RTA, real-time analyzer, functionality into their VSL software. The RTA spectrum analyzer in VSL allows for easy visualization of those treble frequencies, which may need attenuation in order to reduce audio feedback. The Talkback section is used by the sound techs to speak either through the mains or through stage monitors. At LifeGate, we mostly use it for speaking to the musicians on the stage during sound checks, although it can also be useful when addressing the congregation from the mixer. The SL24.4.2 does not include a built-in microphone. Therefore, a dynamic or condenser mic needs to be plugged into the appropriate jack on the rear of the mixer. This jack has phantom power always applied to it, so that a condenser mic can also be used. Note that some types of non-condenser microphones in certain situations can be damaged by phantom power. The Talkback assign buttons allow for groups of buses to be selected as the destination for the Talkback mic signal. One press enables a group, a second press disables it. The Talk button functions as a mute button, but in reverse. When the Talk button is illuminated, the Talkback mic will be heard over the selected assigns. When it is not illuminated, the Talkback mic is muted. Note that there is no way within the Talkback control section to select individual aux buses, but rather only groups of buses. Also, there is no way within the Talkback control section to set Talkback mic volume levels specific to each aux bus. There is only a master volume knob. Rather, via use of the aux flip function, Talkback mic levels can be adjusted individually for each aux bus. If the Talkback level is turned all the way down in the fat channel settings for a given aux bus, the Talkback mic will be effectively disabled for that aux bus, even if the Talkback mic is activated back in the Talkback control section of the mixer. If you recall from the aux bus discussion, a double press of an aux mix button puts the fat channel into aux flip mode. In this mode, the meter encoder group number 7 becomes the Talkback mic send level for the selected aux bus. The monitor section contains the controls for the monitor bus. The monitor bus is a bus whose output goes to either headphones or to monitor speakers in an enclosed control room. The monitor bus enables the sound technician to listen to the outputs of the 4 buses which feed into it. Be careful not to confuse this term monitor with the concept of stage monitors, which are used by the musicians on the stage and which are fed from the aux buses. The monitor bus is for use by the sound technicians, not the musicians. There are 2 volume knobs for the monitor bus, one for headphones and one labeled monitor for control room speakers. This can be rather confusing as they both are used to control the volume of the signals being monitored. It might have been less confusing if the knob labeled monitor had instead been marked control room monitors, but I guess that there wasn't enough room to fit that much text under the knob. We will be using headphones for our live sound mixing, so the knob labeled monitor will normally be turned fully counterclockwise. The monitor bus section has 4 buttons to select from 4 different input sources: the tape input bus, the mains output bus, the solo bus, and the Firewire return bus. These bus inputs can either be enabled individually or in combination with the others. Pushing a button enables a bus input, and pushing it again disables it. Keep in mind that these 2 volume knobs only affect what is heard by the sound tech, not the actual levels of the signals on the 4 buses. If a given bus has no signal on it, then the technician will hear nothing even if the knobs are turned to maximum. As will be seen shortly, both the Q solo bus and the 2-track input have controls which need to be set properly in order for their signals to be heard in the monitor bus. To the left of the monitor bus controls are the 2-track input bus controls. This is a stereo input bus with two possible inputs, either an external analog audio source, such as a tape player, CD deck, etc., or from the digital firewire return from a digital audio workstation program, such as the PreSonus StudioLive DAW software. It is interesting to note that tape recorders and players are rarely used nowadays, but the reference to tape is still in use. The tape inputs to the mixer are on the back of the unit and are of the older phono or RCA type jacks. Phono is short for phonograph, as this was the type of connections originally used by many phonographs, and after them, tape players. Unfortunately, this section of the mixer is somewhat confusing. Be prepared to rewind this section if necessary. The two-track input bus has two input signals which feed it: the tape inputs and the firewire return. The two-track input bus has two fixed output bus destinations: the system mains bus and the just covered monitor bus. Here are some very important points to remember. Number 1, the two-track volume knob controls the two-track output volume for either the signal going to the system mains bus or the signal going to the monitor bus. If the volume knob is fully off, there will be no output volume from the two-track bus going anywhere. Number 2, the two-track buttons only enable the signal going to the system mains. The signal outputting from the two-track to the monitor bus is enabled within the monitor bus control section. With these 2 points in mind, let's look at two different scenarios. Scenario 1, playing one of the two-track inputs over the mains. First, enable one of the two-track input buttons. Push a button to enable it and push it again to disable it. You can either enable the buttons independently or both simultaneously. Second, turn up the two-track input volume knob to an appropriate level. Third, turn up the mains fader to an appropriate level. That wasn't so hard, but now comes the potentially confusing part. Scenario 2, listening to one of the two-track inputs via the monitor bus. First, make certain that both buttons are disabled in the two-track input section. Second, turn up the two-track input volume knob to an appropriate level. Third, enable either the tape or firewire buttons in the monitor bus controls section. Fourth, adjust the monitor headphones volume knob to an appropriate level. Notice in scenario 2, the first step was disabling the buttons in the two-track input section. That's because if either of the two-track input buttons are enabled, that signal will go to the system mains to be heard by all. Remember that the two-track enable buttons for the monitor bus are actually located in the monitor bus controls section. Here's something else to ponder. If you have either of the two-track input buttons activated, you will actually hear those signals through the headphones if the mains button is enabled in the monitor controls section. If we think about this, it will be obvious as to why. Enabling either of the two-track input buttons sends those signals to the mains, where they will be heard over the loudspeakers. And when the mains button is then enabled in the monitor section, anything on the mains will be heard through the headphones. There is actually a third group of variable outputs for the two-track signals. This group is composed of the 10 aux buses. As covered in Part 1 of this training, aux input levels for the tape input and firewire return buses can be set independently for each of the 10 aux buses via the aux flip mode function. These represent a total of 20 independently set variable aux bus inputs, or 20 independently set variable 2-track outputs, depending on how you look at it. In aux flip mode, meter encoder 1 controls the aux input levels for each aux bus firewire return, while meter encoder 2 controls the aux input levels for each aux bus tape input. Although each aux bus can have its own individual levels for both the firewire returns and tape inputs, the 2-track in knob is still the master volume for all of these, just as it is for the 2-track in signals going to the mains and monitor buses. If the 2-track in knob is turned off fully counterclockwise, no tape or firewire signals will be sent to the aux buses, even if the aux buses inputs for these signals are turned up. To the left of the 2-track and monitor control sections, we find the solo bus controls, also referred to as the Q controls. Note that the terms solo and Q are used interchangeably on the SL24.4.2 mixer. The soloed signals from the various buses, channels, and subgroups all pass through the Q bus section of the mixer. You'll remember that the solo bus is one of the buses which can be monitored through the previously discussed monitor bus control section. Simply turn up the Q knob to the desired level. The solo bus can then be monitored via the monitor bus solo control. Please note that if the Q knob is turned fully counterclockwise, off, no solo signal will be outputted. Aux buses are always soloed as PFL, pre-fade listen. Subgroup buses are always soloed as AFL, after fade listen. Therefore, the PFL and SIP buttons do not apply to aux or subgroup soloing. For the 24 input channels only, there is a choice of 3 solo modes. By default, input channels are soloed in AFL mode. No Q buttons are activated for this mode. Simply enabling a channel solo button activates AFL soloing for that channel. The channel will be heard via the Q and monitor bus sections, assuming that the Q volume knob is set at an appropriate level. The second solo choice for the input channels is PFL mode. When the PFL button is activated in the Q section, any soloed input channel, but not aux or subgroup solos, will be switched to pre-fade listen mode. PFL mode is a good choice when comparing the channel input levels, as the solo is not affected by the fader setting. The fader can be set all the way off, and the soloed channel will still be heard via the Q and monitor buses. The third solo choice for the input channels is SIP mode. SIP was previously mentioned in conjunction with the 24 input channels. What exactly is SIP? SIP, short for solo in place, is destructive soloing. When enabled, any input channel which is soloed will be heard at its assigned output, while all other input channels will be muted at their assigned outputs. Obviously, this is not desirable in a live performance situation. However, it may be useful during rehearsal, such as when trying to work on adjusting just a single signal over the system mains or subgroups. To enable SIP, the SIP button in the Q controls must be pressed and held until it illuminates. If the SIP button is just quickly pressed, it will not enable. This prevents accidentally enabling the SIP function. SIP should not be left activated when not in use to prevent unwanted audio disasters during a performance. Directly above the monitor, TwoTrack Input and Q sections controls can be found the Aux Inputs A and B controls. The Aux input buses are return buses, meaning that each of them is a stereo input back into the mixer. They can be used for stereo returns from external processor units, or for external audio feeds from a computer, MP3 player, CD deck, etc. Each aux input bus has a single volume knob controlling its stereo inputs. Notice that there are no output enable buttons on these buses. To turn off the output of either bus, shut off its volume by turning the volume knob fully counterclockwise. Each aux input bus does have a select button. Just like the other select buttons on the SL24.4.2, enabling the button will enable access to the FAT channel functionalities for that bus, such as selective output assigns, dynamics, EQs, etc. This greatly expands the usefulness of these aux input buses. Be aware that the aux inputs A and B are independent from the internal digital FX A and B buses, and likewise independent from the other 10 aux output buses. Therefore, there are no conflicts when simultaneously using the aux input A and B buses, internal mixer FX buses, and the 10 aux output buses.
Additionally, the aux input buses A and B can be individually and variably outputted to the 10 aux buses via the aux flip mode feature of the FAT channel, the same as we just saw for the tape input and firewire return buses. In aux flip mode, meter encoder 3 controls the aux input A levels to each of the 10 aux buses, while meter encoder 4 controls the aux input B levels to each of the 10 aux buses. Also, as seen with the tape input and firewire returns, the aux input A and B knobs are master volumes and must be set to an appropriate level to output any signal, even if the aux flip mode encoders are turned up on some of the aux buses. If these master volumes are turned completely off, no signal will be outputted to the 10 aux buses, regardless of the setting of the aux flip inputs.
Just above the aux input bus's controls are 5 buttons comprising the metering control section. The 5 buttons are labeled Input, Output, GR, Aux, and Faders Locate. The meters being referenced here are specifically the 24 meters found in the FAT channel. The buttons are used to access 5 different functionalities of these meters. These functionalities are in addition to the meters functions which have already been covered in this presentation. When input is activated, the meters display the pre-dynamics, pre-fader signal levels for all 24 input channels. When output is activated, the meters display the post-dynamics, post-fader levels for all 24 input channels. When gain reduction is activated, the meters display any gain reduction being applied to the 24 input channels. The amount of gain reduction shows how much the signals are being attenuated by the compressor and limiter functions of the fat channel. When aux is activated, the meters display the output levels of the 10 aux buses and the FX A and B buses. Meters 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, 15, 17, and 19 will display the output levels of aux buses 1 through 10, respectively. Meters 21 and 23 will display the output levels of FX A and B, respectively. Faders locate has a unique function. When a scene is saved on the SL24.4.2, the input channel fader level settings are also saved. However, the SL24.4.2 does not have flying or motorized faders as do other digital mixers. Therefore, restoring a scene will not restore previously saved fader settings. The fader's locate function guides the user in manually moving the faders to the saved locations. Please see the StudioLive 2442 Owner's Manual for details regarding the use of the fader's locate function. We now finally come to the Digital FX Master Control section of the SL2442. Unlike many digital mixers, which utilize menus and submenus to access mixer features, the SL2442 is primarily controlled directly from the mixing surface. This gives the SL2442 a feel much more like that of an analog mixer, providing for more immediate access to frequently used controls. Since the mixing surface provides access to the most commonly used functions of the SL2442, the Digital Effects Master Control section is primarily used for the following actions: for adjustments to the internal FX processors, for saving and recalling mixer scenes, for saving and recalling individual input channel strip settings, for adjusting, saving, and recalling settings for the 831 band graphic EQs, and for modifying general system parameters. One example of this is the selections of Pre1 or Pre2 for each of the aux bus outputs. There are 3 menu buttons in the Master Control section: FX, Scene, and System. There is also a 4th Master Control menu button, the GEQ button, which is located above the main's Select button. I think of it as the orphan button, sitting out there all by itself, apart from its siblings. There will always be one of the 4 menu buttons enabled at any time. Press a menu button to activate that menu. Press a different menu button to activate a different menu. There are also 7 function buttons: Store, Recall, Page Up, Page Down, Previous, Next, and Tap. It's good to remember the roles of menu versus function buttons in the Master Control section. It would have been helpful to have had all Master Control menu buttons grouped together, including the orphaned GEQ button, and all of the function buttons grouped together. Since the mixer was not designed this way, it's up to the operator to remember the layout. For more information on using the Digital Effects Master Control section, please refer to the PreSonus SL24.4.2 Owner's Manual. It should be emphasized that many of the functions of this section can be more easily adjusted via a linked computer in conjunction with the PreSonus VSL software. One final note: you will see the Master Control Store button briefly flash every so often. This is because the system is regularly saving the current scene settings even if you do nothing. These current scene settings are what will be recalled when the board is first turned on. Restoring a previously saved scene, either through Master Control or the VSL, will overwrite the current settings with the saved ones. If you like your current settings and want to recall them in the future, be certain to save them as a scene. Just above the Digital Effects Master Control section are 8 meters. The first 2 of these meters are the Selected Channel Meters. These 2 meters display signals from whichever of the 24 input channels or aux buses has its Select button activated. It is very helpful to use these 2 meters when adjusting channel gain settings. The meter on the left, labeled LVL, displays the pre-fader input level of the selected channel. Displaying the pre-fader input level aids when making trim adjustments for the 24 input channels, since the channel fader position has no effect on the meter display. A fader can be turned all the way down and you still will be able to visually set the channel trim. A proper trim level will produce a strong signal on the LVL meter without driving it to saturation, that is to say, past 0 dB. The meter on the right, labeled GR, displays the amount of fat channel gain reduction being applied to the selected channel. Gain reduction is applied by dynamic effects such as the compressor and limiter. To the right of the selected channel meters are 4 meters corresponding to subgroups 1 through 4. Unlike the selected channel meters for the input channels, these meters display the output levels of the subgroups. Thus, they are affected by the levels settings of the subgroups faders. Lastly, we come to the mains meters. These are on the far right of the 8-meter group. These display the output levels of the mains outputs. You have reached the end of this training presentation on the PreSonus StudioLive 24.4.2. For additional information, please consult the SL24.4.2 Owner's Manual. The latest version of the manual is available for download directly from the PreSonus support site.